Well, if you have come here for the masterclass from Rupert Morrison, the CEO of Ogview, you are in the right place. Now, if you have a question, make sure you put that in the right place, which is in the chat. But for now, get ready for a deep dive from Rupert Morrison.
Hi, everyone. Unfortunately, I can't see you. I can't speak to you in person. I'm sure that's a common theme. It's still great to be here. My name is Rupert Morrison. I'm the CEO founder of Ogview. By background, originally from New Zealand, and an economist by education. For my sins, I started life off as a management consultant, and thoroughly enjoyed that actually, but got frustrated with spending my life doing what I'm about to do, which is creating PowerPoint slides, developing Excel models, and trying to help my clients do org design more effectively. So I thought there had to be a better way. So I did two things. I wrote a book to segment the methodology, which is called Data-Driven Organization Design. And I funded a company, Ogview, so that we could actually digitize the process of doing org design. But it's important to stress that the thinking and the theory and the practice came first, and then the platform followed that, so that we could enable proper org design. And I will elaborate on what I mean by that through this talk, but I'm going to do that in the context of the current crisis we're in, which is COVID. And I think if there's three messages I would like you to take away. The first is this is an HR director conference, so clearly everyone listening to this believes strongly that the organization is absolutely critical. But I think what's transposed through this COVID crisis is that it's reached the top of the executive agenda, and people, executives, management, have come to recognize just how critical it is to have the organization and an understanding of the organization so that you can execute your plans. The second takeaway is that in order to plan and replan and be quick at doing that, you have to take a data-driven approach. And being data-driven enables you to be more effective at planning and designing and thinking through different circumstances. And thirdly, you have to become adept at adapting. So the world's always been disrupted. Disruption is nothing new. The pace of change is forever accelerating. There are big themes like the future of work and the impact of automation and machine learning and all of it, globalization, all of these trends and many other trends are very common. And the pace is the thing that's changing, but also how disruptive events like COVID can be. And I think it's worthwhile just reflecting that pre-COVID, if you're in the UK, you've had the Brexit process and all the uncertainty that has driven. You had the financial crisis of 2008. We had 9/11 in 2001. So the world is constantly being hit by exogenous, so shocks from outside. And so we shouldn't just think that this is an isolated event. So what a data-driven approach enables is swift decision-making, so that and also more effective decision-making. And what we're fundamentally trying to ensure is that we get the right people with the right skills and the right behaviors and the right competencies, doing the right work, so having the right levels of accountability for that work in the right locations and the right numbers, so that you can execute and achieve your strategic objectives. And pre-crisis, business strategists, this was a fairly lengthy process to work this through. And back in the day when I started life, we would do this using Excel and PowerPoint, and it would take months and months to come up with a plan. Now we're planning, replanning on a quarterly, monthly basis. So therefore, you need to speed up and be more effective at doing that. In terms of COVID specifically, the way that I've thought about this, and a lot of other commentators, is there's three stages. Some people have used much snazzier language, but the first one was really understanding the employees and the health and the well-being of our employees. And when we hit the crisis, but even still as we're going through this, we want to make sure that we understand that the physical and psychological well-being of our employees, and where there are risks or issues that we can help address that we know that people, if they're working remotely, are doing that effectively, that we understand if there are dependents, and we understand the impact on productivity and what have you. So that is the first step. The next step is really about maintaining business continuity. So which roles are mission critical for us to survive through this process? What are the activities that we can't delay and need resilience? And resilience is probably a word, and business continuity that's probably come to the fore more than people had thought would be the case. And I'll give a little example here. In my business, credit control is a critical activity, critical function, but we didn't, my organization is not huge in scale, so we don't have critical mass of employees doing credit control. Actually, we really had just one person responsible for it. So when we were doing our planning, we thought, well, what happens if that team or that person becomes sick, which is quite likely that at some point they will. So we identified the activities like credit control and cross-trained and upskilled other people in the business and the finance function to be able to take on that in the event that wouldn't be the case. So business continuity is really understanding the activities and the work, as well as things that the finance team will always look at, like the cash flows and the forecast cash and all these sorts of issues. And thirdly, we will come out of this. And when we come out, those that are best prepared, those that have laid the foundations and have used the time, because we do have more time now to plan and to set the foundations, will recover the most effective and will maybe gain market share, will certainly be able to achieve their objectives more effectively. So the world doesn't stand still, and how do we therefore make sure we can make the most of the situation? So I've only got half an hour, so I'm not going to go into too much depth in any one of these topics, and I'll focus more on business recovery. But just in terms of employees first, an example of something that we do for ourselves and our clients is understand the entire organization. And what you see here is every box is a person within the structure of the organization. So you've got the chief executive officer, and then on the left you've got the president of services, and under that you have the different pieces. So this is broken into the different functions and sub-functions and roles, and it's colored by health. So has the employee displayed any COVID-19 symptoms, or have they displayed symptoms and are currently self-isolating, or are they just unwell and they've had a positive diagnosis, so they've been tested, or have recovered after displaying symptoms. So what you can see just visually, where in the organization do you have people who perhaps are unwell or not, and what have you, and are there any pockets or teams that are struggling? And then over time you can start to see how that changes. So you can see those with COVID, it increased and then decreased. And then I should point out that this is sanitized data. And what we're also wanting to look at, and this becomes more and more important, is what can we do about it? What action? How can we help the employees? So we sent out 15 questions, of which we track on a regular basis. And one is around childcare. So which employees have children that they're looking after, and are there anyone that is solely responsible for those, and are any of those at school or not at school, school age or not at school age. So we segment the workforce, and then that drives a certain action. And other questions we ask, were people living alone? Do people have the IT infrastructure they needed? The other thing, and thinking about this, is scenario planning. And scenario planning, I think it's now fairly common. You have the V shape, which is, it's a deep recession, but a very swift recovery. A U shape, which is, deep in, but it takes a lot longer to come out. An L shape, which is really deep in, and we stay there for a protracted period of time. Or a W shape, where we're kind of in and out. And this is all about expectations. No one really knows what's going to happen. I'm recording this at beginning of June, midway through June. The most common view is it's going to be U-shaped, but this is going to be very different in different geographies. As I said, I'm originally from New Zealand, and in New Zealand, everything's opening up. People are getting together for parties, sports events are being put on, and so people have returned to work. However, tourism is down and other industries are impacted. So it's not just relevant to think about how does this impact your economy. It's each economy is impacted differently, but also each industry is impacted differently. Some businesses are growing rapidly, others are in deep distress and really struggling. So you need to understand the macroeconomic impact and then the impact on your organization, and then within that context set plans. So what I did is I actually created multiple scenarios, because at the beginning of March, end of February, we had a V, U, and L shape scenario. Now we're replanning again because we've learned so much, and so we'll have a July reforecast with an updated work plan. And it's important to work very closely with finance to understand, well, what are the financial drivers, productivity, EBITDA, cash, all these sorts of financial measures, and then what is the workforce, and what are you trying to achieve, and how do you get the workforce to ensure, and the organization to ensure, that you're achieving those objectives, which are moving over time because the whole world's shifting. It's important that when we talk about the organization and organization design, Dave Ulrich said this, I think, fantastically in October, that people can be champions, but organizations win championships. It's not talent or people which provide the competitive edge, but organization systems. The key question is how to build an organization as a system to win in the marketplace. Now, the idea that an org is a system, I think, is not new. Galbraith had the STAR model with 5 elements of the system. McKinsey's had the 7S model. So people have said that the organization isn't just structure and who reports to who, but how do we turn that into something that's practical? How do we think about it? How can we quantify each of the different lenses of that organizational system, and most importantly, tie them together? So I'll try and answer that. The first thing to say is that your strategy drives your organizational system, and the system is there to drive your business performance. And so you can quantify how effective your system is, and a lot of people call organizational effectiveness by how effective it is at executing that strategy and driving that business performance as defined by that strategy. And we really do this by connecting the system with data. And so we start off with people. So you have your organization with people, and we have data about those people. You have an employee ID, a name, pay data, so what grade they are, salary, date of birth, so demographic. So we'll typically have 60 to 100 pieces of data about people. But people do roles, and roles have to be designed. And it astonishes me how often I go and see the information that organizations have, some of the most sophisticated organizations on earth, and how few of them have a grasp of their role grid. And the role grid is, what are the role families and the levels? And you shouldn't confuse level with grade. Grade has to do with pay and comp, and level has to do with levels of accountability and time discretion. So that really ties back to Elliot Jack's thinking. And so we have the level, and within that we have all the roles. And for each role there is a purpose. What is the purpose of the role? What is the target salary? So we link to the grading piece, and bonus and LTIP and all these other things. And positions, you have a one-to-many relationship between role and position. So for each role, there could be one or several, many, or even hundreds or thousands of positions. So an example is you have the role, which is sales rep, and the position has a scope and a title and a location. So it could be sales rep in the northeast of the US, reporting into head of sales for North America. And these positions can have a start and end date. So they can, as you're scaling up your organization, you have more and more positions, or you might be scaling down parts of the business so that you have end dates. And then people fill positions. So Anna Brown could be that sales rep in the Northeast. And so what we're doing is we're connecting these are different data sets, and there's relationships between them. Now, what's also interesting is that this data model can also be used for other components like succession planning. So Anna might be sales rep Northeast, but she might be a successor to, the VP or the head of sales in North America. So you can have, and for instance, Anna could do a job share, or could be working part-time with someone else, or could be in two different positions because there's a vacancy in marketing and she has to spend some of her time doing that. So it's not always a one-to-one relationship in terms of people to positions, but roles to positions there is. But when we think about roles, we think about three different data sets as well. So we think about, what is the role trying to achieve? What are the outcomes that this role is producing? So if it's a sales rep, it's going to be sales, but it's also going to be number of client satisfaction scores, and maybe, in my industry, net revenue retention. And what is the work that the role does? So what are the activities and what are the accountabilities? A lot of people have heard of RACI mapping. So this is similar to that. I just am not a big fan of RACI because I think it's too confusing. What's the difference between responsible and accountable? Most people don't really understand that. So I just want to know who's responsible. And I also want to know, if it's a decision, who's got veto power. So with the activities, you've also got the decisions and the out. So who approves what decision? And what RACI doesn't capture is who actually does the work, who's doing something. So I talk about RAD, responsible, approve, do. But whatever acronym you use, you're setting the target for, and the target here on accountabilities, on activities is accountability. But equally, you have the competencies. What are the skills? What are the behaviors? What's the knowledge required to be effective at doing that work so you can achieve those outcomes? And that is role specific. And it's all well and good to set that, and that produces a job description. But what we're also interested in knowing is, what are the actuals? What are the actual outcomes that are being produced? What is the actual work that people do? What are the actual competencies? And therefore, what's the gap? And so that's how we're connecting the system, and we're doing this dynamically over time. This would be a point where, if I was talking to you, I would ask for questions and try and make sure that you've all kind of followed what I've said, and I'm conscious that I've been monologuing. So I'll just give you pause for breath while I move to say that I'm just now going to focus on positions and people, and to some extent roles. I don't have time to talk about how we define objectives and activities and competencies, and how we use that data, perhaps for another day. So when we think about positions, we think that's our demand, that's our workforce plan. And when we think of our people, that's our supply. And so then this is workforce planning. But when we do workforce planning, it's important to recognize that there are different levels of detail. And people they throw out a term like strategic workforce planning without really defining what that means. So I like to break it into three levels: strategic, operational, and tactical. And we can really think of strategic the planning horizon is multi-year. So depending on your industry, 3 to 10 years. If you're a nuclear plant or something like that, then it might be 15 to 20 years into the future. Now, with that planning horizon being so far into the future, the level of granularity has to be a lot less. So that you're really thinking quarterly or annually. If you have a 10-year plan, you're thinking in maybe not even annual chunks, maybe 3 years out, 6 years out, 9 years out. And then the level of aggregation, you're really doing it at business line. At geographies. Are we in 5 years' time? Where do we think we're going to be in Europe versus North America or APAC? Business lines. Certain business lines might be growing, others might be declining. And role families, or even slightly above that. You're not thinking at the position level or even at the role level. How many roles do you need of X? How many people in IT do we need? How many developers do we need? How many Marcoms? So that's the strategic level. And what you're trying to do is take away that complexity so you can think in time. Operational workforce planning. It's really akin to budgeting. It's akin to the monthly cycle, the monthly, quarterly, annual cycle. The planning horizon is at most up to 24 months. Often it will just be 12 months into the future, maybe 18. And the level of granularity, it's monthly, and it's aligned to those reporting cycles, and you're really doing it at the position level, the role and position level. And tactical workforce planning is really resourcing. So that's done at the individual level. That's allocating people to shifts. In the planning horizon might be 4 to 8 weeks. It's daily, weekly level. When it comes to strategic workforce planning, and this is just one component of it, but it's important also to think about your workforce segment. So segmentation, and you want to slice the organization in different ways. And a way to think about it is time to productivity, which is on my x-axis here. And each bubble here represents a role. So you're really doing workforce segmentation at the role level. And the question is, if someone in that role leaves, how long does it take to source them? So, to hire, onboard, train, and make productive so that they're fully productive. And to quantify that in terms of months. We call that TTP, time to productivity. And on the y-axis is an impact in terms of impact on the organization. So if this role is done ineffectively, what would the impact be on the key business outcomes? There are different ways of quantifying this, but a way is just to use a swing scale where you pick the most critical role and you make everything relative to that, and that the most critical would be 100, and everything's relative on a scale of 1 to 100. And there are multiple ways of thinking about quantifying this. But then there's also growth. So which roles are growing the most and which ones are declining? So there's not ever two. I mean, management consultants, we love to put everything on a 2x2. But when you're doing segmentation, it's quite helpful to think of a few different dimensions. And you do this at the role level. So actually the amount of data isn't that great. And then we move into the planning cycle. So plan, do, review. Everyone's heard this. What does planning mean? Well, you say, well, where do we want to get to? What are the targets that we want to achieve? Then you execute, you do. So then you want to understand actuals, and then you review. So you want to understand the gaps. Where are we above? Where are we behind? And then you move into the replan. So this is a continuous cycle. So practically, The way we turn this is into, I love inventing acronyms. So one of those is TAF, Target Actual Forecast. So the gray line is the target. So you say, well, we want to go from 2.4 million in the slide to 3 million of cost. We want to grow the organization cost by this amount. And that was set at a point in time. So you set your target down. And then you want to say, well, how are our actuals doing? So you can see here that they were tracking along, and then all of a sudden, boom, the actuals exploded well above the target. Obviously, people just got a bit too enthusiastic in the scenario. So then you're like, okay, what are we going to do about it? So then the forecast is that how do we get back to where we need to be? Now, obviously, you can always revise your target as well, and there's a governance process for managing that. And what we're really talking about here is position management. So operational workforce planning and position management are totally intertwined. And I think it's important, often CHROs say, I am the Chief Employee Experience Officer. And the entire lens is on the employee life cycle, and the experience, which, don't get me wrong, is absolutely critical. You know, employees need to have a fantastic experience and need to be well looked after, and you need to work them through their life cycle. This is not an either or discussion. This is an and discussion. But position management also has a life cycle. You plan positions in. You do scenario modeling. You say, what if this, what if that? How could we react here? So you're planning. Plan then turns at a certain point, you say, this is a budget. You make a decision. You say, you know, it's time for talk is over. You make a decision and you have your budget. And that then gets turned over to talent acquisition or internal moves, and you're hiring for those. Or if you're demising the position, you're working out how to reduce the force to meet the lower demand. So then they're filled, and then there's a maintenance process. Employees are moving from position to position. It's dynamic, and then at a point in time that position is no longer required. Or the position might be changed to such an extent that 2 new positions are created, and therefore it's demised with 2 new positions in place. And if you're in a growth organization, you're doing that all the time. Now, it's interesting to think how this impacts the employee life cycle. So that's on the bottom. You have your operational workforce plan and your budget. Then you move into recruitment or talent acquisition. Then you fill, so there's onboarding and payroll. Then there's maintenance, which impacts succession planning. And then you've got demising, which is the exit process and compromise agreements and all those kind of elements. And what's important is to understand, like I showed, I'll just jump back on this slide, how your actuals versus your targets are evolving. And at a point in time, what does that look like? This is a different visualization. At the top, you have the parent company, and that's broken into each of the geographies. So the United States, Hong Kong, Australia, China, the United Kingdom. So and then it's broken into the key functions, and it can get broken down into other elements. And for each one of those, you can see we've just hovered over it. We can see what is the actual compensation versus the target compensation. What is the headcount delta? What was the actual target headcount? So in this example, on MATR, it was the target was 30 for headcount, and the actual was 36. So it's 20% over. So that's an amber. And you can see just to the left of it, INLG is 40% over, and some are under. And so you want to understand, where are we over, where are we under, so you can deep dive and do something about it. Hopefully I've not been talking too fast. It's hard to judge the timing on these things. What I've demonstrated is just how critical the organization is. You can't execute strategy without it. And in a time, particularly now, it's of paramount importance. How many CEOs say our most important asset is our people? always said, read any board report. It will always, any annual report will say our people are the golden source of value here. But the organization is often the last thing on the agenda. That has shifted because it's so critical. And I think everyone is clearly in this virtual room because of that. They understand that, that. But how do you do it? And everything I've described, everything I've walked you through is turning a lot of traditional processes and applied that in a data-driven way, and using a data-driven approach so that you can be more effective at planning, more effective at designing in those changing circumstances, and to be adept at adapting, being nimble and agile. You need the data at your fingertips. You need to be able to drag and drop, make changes in real time so that you can make those decisions with confidence that you're making the right decision. And when things are veering off course, that you know that early, so you have early warnings signals so that you can take action quickly, because none of us get all this right all the time. I can certainly vouch for that in my experience. I certainly haven't. So I hopefully that's been useful. If there are questions, please let me know, and I will go back to the team and see if there are any questions that I can answer. So we don't have too much time. One question, here are some options. Would you recommend, as the very first step to creating this kind of new system in a very traditional resistant organization? So the question is, what would you recommend as the very first step to creating this kind of system in a very traditional resistant organization? My exec team are interested in revamping OD, but I'm not sure they see the full value. How would I start getting their buy-in on a project like this? So the first thing I would start with is, what are we trying to achieve? What are the business outcomes that you're trying to achieve? And why are we not achieving it? And then ask them, why are we not achieving it? What's stopping us? Now, they might say we don't have enough capital. They might say we have the wrong product. They might say we're in the wrong market. But for most of those answers will come down to an organizational question for why you're not executing. So we don't have the right product. Well, why is that? We don't have the right product management function. Do we not have the right marketing? What work are we not doing to not understand that? Sometimes it might be a process question. But it will often come down to skills and competence. So you don't have to talk in the organizational model to start off with. Talk about what we're trying to achieve, what's getting in our way, and then you start talking about the organizational ways of addressing those questions. And therefore, you start moving to org design. It's fascinating to me when I look at, for instance, competency data. I've sat in a room in a media company with CEOs of each of the different brands, and the CEOs of each of those different brands were more interested in competency data than anyone, because their ability to execute is, do they have the right skills, the technical skills, and people the right behavior and attitudes to execute effectively. I mean, that's what management spends a huge amount of time talking about. So I think it's just elevating the conversation to that business discussion. And by the way, that this has a huge financial lens. If your organizational planning is also a financial plan. It's the people cost over time. Finance always talk about efficiency and productivity. Well, you can do the same thing. What is the cost of delivering what? Is the cost of doing this right? Do you have the people at the right grade doing the right work, or are they too senior? Often when we do activity analysis, we see that 30% of the senior management is doing transactional activities. They shouldn't be doing that work. It should be done lower in the organization. Is the work being done in the right location? And then business leaders will say, oh, we need to be able to deal with the future of work, as an example. Well, what are you talking about? What work? What activities are you really talking about? What is the cost of doing that? What would the if you're going to create automation of that, what would the impact be, and how could you quantify it? So very quickly, this is very much a business conversation. And if you're saying traditional, what does a traditional organization even mean? If I would go back 100 years ago and look at the Fortune 100, and I would say, how many of those organizations exist today? Well, the answer is 0. GE was the last one that exited the Fortune 100. Bezos said recently that he fully predicts that Amazon won't exist in X years' time, 30, 40 years, it won't exist. And his whole job is to hang on for as long as possible. Now, that's coming from the world's wealthiest man of one of the, depending on your, wealthiest, most valuable organizations on earth. So by definition, no one can be, in a sense, traditional. I mean, that I have a friend of mine works in an organization that has been around for 400 years. It's a Swedish organization. They've evolved from making guns to now creating all sorts of things, leveraging technology and automation and robots and all sorts of amazing stuff. So is that a traditional organization? Well, what they produce is fairly traditional, stuff that works in chainsaws and garden supplies and all these sorts of things. But is it traditional? No, I mean, it's incredibly innovative organization. So 400 years old, and there are lots of examples. And if you have that mindset, the risk is probably just too great. And I think most leaders would understand that. So Kate, hopefully that answers that question. Not sure if there are any other questions. I don't think so. So again, thank you all so much. Hopefully this was useful. Shame not to see you all, perhaps sometime in the future. Thank you.
I'm sorry, did someone just hear a song from Bradley Cooper and Lady Gaga? Because those dives were so deep, we are definitely far from the shallows. Sorry, they really told me not to make that joke, and I made it anyway. Those were fantastic. Big thanks to all of our masterclass teachers and deep divers, and thanks to all of you who asked questions in the chat as well. It is time for you to pick from a myriad of options. In front of you, you can check out a lightning talk, which I think is a great idea. You can also network, and of course, the partner zone is always open for you. We'll be right back here for keynotes very shortly.